I am Max Keiser. This is the Keiser Report. Look at the globe, the global economy. See what's happening as the global banks perpetuate their global money printing. All kinds of things happening, Stacy.
Right. I just want to give you a heads up for the second half. We're in Phoenix in the second half interviewing Gerald Celente. Just to give you a heads up on that because it's something to look forward to. But in terms of this global money printing from the central banks and from the private banks and all the banks, well, there's an interesting thing going on, right? We've covered the fact that Michael Burry, the famous hedge fund manager, is short treasuries. Now we know he's short by $250 million. So his position, he was also short, by the way, Bitcoin. So his positions aren't looking all that great right now because look at this. Bond bubble keeps inflating. Value of global bonds has hit fresh all-time high at $69 trillion despite rising inflation.
Yeah, we've been doing this show for 13 years, and almost for that entire time, we've been talking about various money managers shorting the bond market. And for 13 years, that's been a losing trade. Michael Burry joins 20 or so other money managers we've covered over the many years who've decided to stick their necks out and say, hey, the bonds are topping out. We're going to go short bonds. So it looks like he's losing money on that trade, just like everyone before him. And he also went short Bitcoin, and he's taking a colossal loss on that right now as well. So the thing about money managers, if you watch our show for years and years, you know that 1 year does not make for a track record of any duration or magnitude. Anybody can have a hot hand for a year or maybe two, but very, very few can extend it out 5 or 6 years. That's why almost no money manager or hedge fund has ever beaten the Dow Jones or the S&P 500 consistently, pretty much ever.
That brings up an interesting point because I'll say that just buy an index fund. You track the S&P 500 or the Dow and you'll outperform all the private equity and hedge funds, and you don't need to pay them 2 and 20. You don't need to pay them 2% of their assets under management every year or 20% of your profits. And that brings me to this interesting data point here in that as of this past week or two, the U.S. has this new mandate whereby hospitals have to provide transparency about how much things cost at their hospital. And look at this data for cash, somebody who's paying cash, and it's the blue dots in this chart I'm going to give you. Paying cash, i.e. individual Joe Bag of Donuts, the ordinary schlub, versus the red dots, which are the biggest major insurers and what they pay. And it's pretty much equal. You're paying those insurers $1,000, $2,000 a month to negotiate on your behalf. Well, you're doing a better job. Ordinary Joe Bag of Donuts with cash is doing a better job than some of the major insurers. So the new hospital price transparency rule just hit. The prices they charge clearly have no relation to anything, more dysfunctional than any central planner. So this is the prices for a knee MRI. The red dots are the major insurers, as I said. The little gray dots are other insurers. And the blue dot is the cash price. So Baptist Memorial in Memphis is the first one. And you see the blue dot, they're down there with most of the major insurers. But there are major insurers up over that halfway point. That's people paying 10x what the Medicare reimbursement price is. Beaumont Hospital, Royal Oak, Michigan, as you see, cash is outperforming a lot of the major insurers, and only in Mass General and Boston are they up there paying with the major insurers as well, 10x what Medicare, the government, reimburses these hospitals for that same knee or MRI.
Right. Well, again, we've been talking about this for a number of years. The medical insurance industry, the Obamacare program, is a complete scam. And that does not include the so-called deductible. So when you add the deductible into the mix, what you find is that you pay cash anyway for the procedures, right? Because you have like an $8,000 or $9,000 deductible, you're paying $20,000 a year in medical insurance. If you need to go to the hospital you have to pay the 8,000 or 9,000 for the procedure. So what's the 20,000 for? It's a complete extortionary layer imposed by corporations to extract wealth from the many. That's government sanctioned. So it's a government sanctioned extortion racket with no benefits whatsoever.
Yeah, at least like in New York and New Jersey, when they used to have the mob, they'd come and shake you down once a month, just like these Obamacare insurance policies, right? They'd shake you down once a month. You have to hand over the money. At least they provide a service, right? They used to provide a service, and they wouldn't break your legs, and you wouldn't need an MRI. But also they would, provide the trash collection, make sure nobody robbed your store or anything like that. Here, you literally get nothing back. You're better off just paying cash, or it costs the same anyway.
Well, yeah, as we pointed out, living in France, for example, we used to go right to the American hospital to get medical treatments, pay cash, and it was, 1/10 or less of what you would pay in the U.S. And this is at a world-class hospital like the American hospital in Paris. And it's if you look at pricing around the world, you can tell that in the U.S. they have an interesting situation that falls under the heading of healthcare. It's just like banks are constantly getting bailed out with free money. The hospitals are constantly getting essentially the right to extort. And that is, of course, highly detrimental and causes incredible problems.
Right. And I just want to reiterate that those major insurers, the CEOs there are getting paid 10, 15, 20, 25, even up to $50 million a year. The average American is making like $50,000 a year. And yet that person may be working, retail job, earning $50,000 a year, is able to negotiate the same price that those guys making $50 million. So what are you paying those guys $50 million a year at those major insurers? Like, this is the whole system that is the quintillionaire system. They're being paid handsomely for no discernible talent, no discernible merit.
I have no idea why Americans have this mental gymnastics. They go out of their way to save 2 cents a gallon on gasoline. They'll drive a mile away, 5 miles away. They go to Costco and buy 80-pound bags of dog food. They go to Walmart and buy a $2 sweater. They love to get a bargain. They, in the whole industry and online with Groupon, get your Groupon together and go get a sushi lunch for half off. But when it comes to healthcare, all the money they saved in all those different discount schemes, they throw out the window and pay 5 times as much by catering to these extortionists who just, they don't actually provide any cost benefit with the insurance because of the so-called deductible. And on top of that, they charge $20,000 a year for somebody to get absolutely nothing.
It's a shoddy product. And speaking of shoddy products, inflation is also, you see that in shrinkflation as products shrink so that you don't see the sticker shock. But even with that sort of stuff, we're actually starting to see more and more inflation. And in fact, even CNBC is reporting on it. I might add a few months after we started reporting on this. But for everyday Americans, inflation is a double blow to bank accounts. The latest consumer price index, which measures changes in how much Americans pay for certain goods and services, finds prices rose an average of 5.4% in July compared to a year prior, mostly driven by food and fuel costs. That's tied with June's increase as the highest inflation rate in 13 years. And they point out, importantly, Max, this is the important thing, inflation can make it easier to pay off debt and even help bump up salaries. But it also makes savings less valuable and goods and services more expensive. And currently, wage gains in the U.S. are not keeping pace with sky-high inflation.
Right. This is why the government can't use the I word, inflation, because that would mean that responsibly they would need to raise interest rates and wages would have to also rise. But if you are in the business of Wall Street, where you are leveraged to the tune of 100 to 201 and you rely on that cheap credit at near 0% interest, you can't use the word inflation. As a matter of fact, if all of your packaged goods are shrinking in size for the same cost, or all of your necessities are rising in cost, that, according to the government, is deflation, right? It's Orwellian doublespeak. They actually call that deflation because they're in the propaganda business, and we haven't seen government propaganda from American policymakers on this scale, really, and really for quite some time. You have to go back to the 1930s.
Well, speaking of propaganda, many of the Democratic policy is encouraging UBI, a whole bunch of stimulus checks, more money printing, and they say they're doing it to help the people, the poor people, the ordinary people. So this is an interesting bit of data that Zaid Jalani tweeted out. Top 5 most unequal states, according to the Gini Coefficient Index: DC, New York, Louisiana, Connecticut, and California. The top 5 most equal: Utah, Alaska, New Hampshire, Wyoming, and Hawaii. As you can see, most of the top most unequal are all very, very highly Democratic areas, versus the top 5 most equal are the more Republican voting areas. So even though the left will say that they're so, for the worker, for helping poor people, for, economic justice and stuff like that, what you see is actually economic injustice, we believe, brought about by the sort of policies of money printing, driving up price of houses, for example, and who owns the houses, but the same professors, doctors, lawyers, the creative class that are the Democratic voters in New York, in California, and the hedge fund guys in Connecticut.
Right. Well, the left in America, just like socialists in other countries or communists, they love to be in control of the money printing because they love to give it to themselves.
Sure.
And we see that reflected in the Gini coefficient in those states that are identified as the most left-wing states in America.
Well, it's easier, I suppose, to control people in the way that you make them happy, think they're doing better by just continuously giving them a $2,000 a month check. Right now, there are millions of Americans who signed a MoveOn.org petition to introduce a UBI of $2,000 a month for every American. And that makes it feel like you're getting something. But as we pointed out, when inflation keeps on going up, when your cost of healthcare keeps on going up, when all those costs keep on going up, it's always going to outpace whatever free money.
Yes, your purchasing power is guaranteed to fall when you print money. We're going to take a break. When we come back, Gerald Celente. Don't go away. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Yeah, we're in Phoenix, Arizona. I have the great pleasure of introducing none other than Gerald Celente of Trends Journal. Gerald, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
So the timing was that Joe Biden was going to stage a remarkable passing of the torch to the Taliban as part of a 9/11 20th year anniversary. Instead, on the 50th anniversary that the U.S. dropped the gold standard, we went on a pure fiat money world. Some would say that that's what created the crisis in Afghanistan. That's when Kabul fell.
Well, it was going to fall at any time, and it was only a matter of time. And it's another war that America started that lost. They haven't won a war since World War II. They haven't won the Korean War. They lost the Vietnam War. They lost the Iraq War. They lost the Afghan War.
You know, thinking about this Afghan war, and of course, going back 10 years, you were very vocal, talking to the mainstream media at that time and about quite point blank saying, hey, you know, we're probably going to lose in Afghanistan, and kind of agreeing with what Ron Paul, his sentiments at the time. And you were immediately, as you describe it, more or less blackballed from mainstream media. So what is it about the U.S. that they just hate to hear opposing voices to anything that's against the war machine?
Go back to the mainstream media. Go to fair inaccuracy in reporting. Read their reports. When the Iraq War happened, they had about 10% of the people on there, less, that were against the war. And then after it started, about 68% of the people were also government people supporting the war. You know, remember that guy Phil Donahue? They fired from for coming out against the war. So as George Carlin said, it's one big club and you ain't in it. And the big club is the military-industrial complex is controlling the country. And you don't have to believe me. There was this guy named by the name of what? Dwight D. Eisenhower, five-star general, supreme commander of the Allied forces, two-term president, farewell address, January 17th, 1961, warning the American people that the military-industrial complex is robbing the nation of the genius of the scientists, sweat of the laborers, and the future of the children. And again, you go back to 2001 when I said, no, we're going to lose this war. And they did a movie on it with Zizzy and Honey Boy from my book, What Zizzy Gave Honey Boy. And I was blackballed from everybody. They don't want to hear the truth. And again, they're in control. The banksters, the military-industrial complex, what morons and imbeciles call big pharma, how about drug dealers, and big tech. They're in control of everything. There is no freedom in America. Who do they have on the mainstream media? Only the people that swallow the and spew it out coming from the government. If you don't believe what the government says, well, you're a conspiracy theorist. How could anybody with a brain bigger than a pea listen to the coming out of these morons' mouths?
Others like Julian Assange actually did brilliant investigative journalism on this point, and he's rotting in a jail cell in London right now being tortured because he told the truth. And think about it, if those facts were taken seriously with the mainstream media and the military-industrial complex, as it's called, how many lives would have been saved and treasured? $2 trillion wasted. I saw something online that was, funny and yet sad at the same time. The quote goes like this about what happened in Afghan. U.S. trained Afghan army failed to defend U.S.-backed Afghan government from U.S.-funded Afghan warlords. Does that about sum it up?
That's about sums it up. And I get the line, too, when they're pulling out American soldiers and contractors. What am I, 6 years old contractors? I mean, what are they laying brick? I mean, these are mercenaries.
Yeah.
They're not contractors.
No, mercenaries for hire. And they make up a disproportionate amount. It made the U.S., going back to the Vietnam War, we used to actually see the bodies come off the planes. And that would kind of sensitize the public to what was actually happening, the atrocities in Vietnam. But they, of course, outlawed that. You never see that. Yep. And they just talk about contractors, not like soldiers. And they avoided conscription or the draft in this way. But it costs a lot of money, and in this case, $2 trillion. Speaking of money and money printing to fund all this, and the Vietnam War, prompted Nixon to shut the gold window and went on to an all-fiat world, and so that's why the $2.2 trillion for the Afghan invasion. Had we not been in a fiat money standard, it probably would have cost less than a tenth of that. But nevertheless, according to the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization, food price inflation's up 31% from last July. Is this transitory, as we're being told, Gerald?
Yeah, I mean, how could anybody swallow that too? I mean, this guy, Jerome Powell, the bankster heading the Federal Reserve, he said this was temporary how many months ago? And what's temporary? And now the shortages are happening again. They're closing down ports again in China. And the ports are all backed up in California again. Now the inflation's going to keep increasing. And again, the standard of living is declining. The facts are there. The facts are there. So inflation's going up, wages are going up. No, wages are going up, but they're going up much slower than inflation. So no, this is going to be, again, the bigs are getting bigger, the rich are getting richer. According to the data, the billionaires got $8 trillion richer since the COVID war began. And by the way, that's the term that they used when they started this. We're fighting a war, we're fighting a war, we're fighting the COVID war. And you keep hearing it, whether it's from the Netherlands, whether it's from Israel, whether it's from Australia, they're all saying we're in a war, we're in a war, we're in a war, and the people march off the war.
Right, it seems like they're not only quite poor in the vocabulary choice. If everything is a war, then nothing's a war. We had the war on poverty, the war on drugs, stop this war, stop war, the war on COVID. But they're also bad at geography. Apparently they spent $2 trillion trying to find Saudi Arabia, and they landed in Kabul.
Yeah, well, again, who was the guy that started the Al-Qaeda? What was his name? Jimmy Carter? Yeah, right. You remember the Saudis bringing him in to get Russia defeated in Afghanistan.
Right. So they can't spell, they can't add, but they're entrusted with our money printers, and the only thing they know how to do is to print more money. And the public now has had a taste of the way a hedge fund lives. This guy now runs the New York Mets, Cohen. He's a guy who just gets free money from the Fed, and as does the hedge fund industry, like Bernanke. Ben Bernanke works in that industry. industry now. But the public, since they've got all these stimulus checks, they know what it means to live like a hedge fund. You just sit back, take all the free money, and you don't really have to work. So now they're insisting, they want $2,000 a month stimulus checks. Why shouldn't the average person in America be able to live like the average hedge fund manager in America and just get free money?
Well, that's what they're going to do. They shut them up and they keep them quiet and they follow orders. I mean, why would you want to get a job if you're getting $15 an hour by doing nothing and staying at home? And everybody, whether you name the field, people can't find workers. This country's going down so fast. It's not only here, it's all over the world. I mean, Australia's locked down, New Zealand's locked down, one place after another, they're all locked down. You can't go anywhere in a restaurant in France, in Italy, in New York City, in California without your passport. In Israel, again, they were locking down. No, this economy's not coming back. This thing's going down big time. It's going down big time, and they're going to keep printing more and more cheap money, artificially propping it up, and making it look like everything's okay.
I mean, you and I are a little long in the tooth, perhaps, than some of the people in the audience. We remember guys like Paul Volcker, who, when they got into an inflationary conundrum, they raised rates.
They raised rates.
Okay. Here, inflation's running at the same rate today as it was when Volcker raised rates to 16%. And rates are under 2%. And the thinking is that there's so much debt out there, so many derivatives, that it would be, in fact, impossible to even raise rates by 1.5% without triggering massive defaults across the entire financial spectrum. Every bank, every insurance company, right across the entire financial spectrum. Is that accurate?
Well, look what just happened when the Fed came out with their numbers, their report on Wednesday last week, when they came out and said that they may raise rates sooner than they expected. The markets went down. The whole thing's been pumped up artificially by all this cheap money. They didn't teach me about negative and zero interest rate policy or quantitative easing. Isn't that a nice word? How about making up a word like that? Buying junk bonds. Oh, capitalism? This isn't capitalism. I think Mussolini called it fascism, the merger of state and corporate powers.
Yeah, why don't they call, instead of quantitative easing, financial and monetary laxative?
Yeah.
That's...
And bailing out your buddies.
Right, bailing out the buddies. And there's no end to it because you can always add more zeros. But the wealth and income gap, Jay Powell and others in the establishment are adamant that money printing doesn't cause wealth inequality. Your thoughts?
Why would anybody believe this guy when everything he said is wrong? The facts are there. The billionaires got $8 trillion richer. Look at the numbers coming out from the United Nations about the hundreds of millions of people that have gone into extreme poverty since they started the COVID war. Look at the numbers of people that are falling out of the middle class. Look how big the bigs have got. Here's a number for you. 47% of the businesses in America are with employees of 500 or less. So the small businesses are gone. Then you take that number 500 out, and you have hardly any small businesses. But hey, you got Walmart, you got Lowe's, you got Home Depot. And how about Staples? When I was a young guy, they had a thing called stationery stores, hardware stores, butcher shops, grocery stores. No, not grocery stores. We have grocery chains. The bigs have taken over everything. All the people have become are plantation workers on the global plantation of Slavelandia.
It seems almost that the vaccines, we're still in a period of discussing how effective they are, et cetera. But it seems like it's almost like when they need another pump on the Fed, gas, to step on the gas, we need another booster shot. They've now tied booster shots to monetary easing, right? So there's a...
Yeah, they have.
Right? So,
you can't make this stuff up. Powell came out and said to get... They're talking, the feds are coming out and say get a booster shot.
Right, there's another variant. So the economy won't improve. So we need both a booster to bail out Pfizer again, and we need monetary easing to bail out Wall Street again. They've done the impossible, Gerald.
Yeah.
They've been able to create monetary policy in a hypodermic needle now. It's fantastic.
It is.
It's incredible. So on the trends watch, 2021 is more than half over. The second half, we got about 20 seconds left. What are something to watch out for?
The crash, the market crash. The market crash may happen in October.
Where will it start? The bond market, maybe? Because this has been in a 40-year bull market.
Yeah.
It seems extended.
Yeah, and again, the whole thing is artificial. It's all artificial. And they're going to come a point when they're going to have to raise interest rates. And when that happens, this thing goes down. And again, you're looking at the slowdown from the variant, and it's big. You look at the numbers in tourism, look at the numbers in hospitality, look at one after another, restaurants, they're all going down big time.
So, okay, you heard it from Gerald Celente from the Trends Journal. Market crash in the second half of 2021. Thanks for being on the Keiser Report.
And thank you.
All right, that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. I want to thank our guest, Gerald Celente. Until next time, bye, y'all.